Hello, everybody. This is Sammy Pollock. I'm the social media coordinator for THELAR Management Group, and I'll be moderating the event today. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Farah. This is Sammy Pollock, social media coordinator at THELAR Management Group. So we're going to start the event in about 8 minutes. So stay tuned until then. Then we'll have Kevin on and we'll start the event. Glad that you can join us. Hello, everybody. Okay, we're just waiting on our speaker, King Kevin Dorival, to enter the conversation. We would like to welcome you to this space and thank you so much for coming. My name is Sammy Pollock, social media coordinator at THELAR Management Group, as well as a research assistant on projects for the company. Let's hold off on anything else until we get Kevin on. Now, okay, cool. No, so you requested at the same time. That was why. Okay, but now you're able to speak. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming. You can unmute your mic.
Hey, bless up, everybody. How's it going?
Good, good. Okay, so, so just for anybody who wasn't able to hear what I had just said, I'm Sammy Pollock. I'm the social media coordinator for THELAR Management Group, as well as a research assistant. I'm a digital activist. I have a passion for the arts, community outreach, culture, and social media, both in the US and worldwide. It is my pleasure today to do the first ever THELAR Twitter Spaces event in honor of celebrating Black History Month. Black History Month is normally centered around experiences in the United States, but we want to talk about Haiti's impact on Black History Month. We are honored to have three-time author, Haitian American entrepreneur, and change maker King Kevin Dorival as a guest today to discuss our topic, An Untold History, How the Haitian Revolution Impacted the Fight to End Slavery in the U.S. Kevin, why are you passionate about Haitian history?
I mean, my passion for Haitian history dates back to when I first realized that there wasn't any history told about my people. My family was born and raised in Haiti, Cap Haitien, my mom and dad, and I really didn't learn anything about the history until I was like 17 years old, a junior in high school. There was one sentence about General Toussaint defeating Napoleon in the Haitian Revolution. And I was just amazed by that because all my life, all I heard about was Napoleon and other European heroes or Asian heroes or Spanish heroes, but never anything about African heroes. And so that little spark created a flame in me to just do more investigating and to find out more information myself.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's really cool. And so you're just out of interest, your legal name is Kevin Dorival, but you call yourself King Kevin Dorival. Can you tell us why that is?
Yes, definitely. This goes back to my school days again. And when I was in college, me and some students did a protest at FAU because there was no African courses being taught. And case in point, I love art, I love history. Those two of my favorite subjects, and still are my favorite subjects. I'm a art collector, and also you can say a book collector. I probably have like 2,000 books right now. I have probably more books than anything, more books than money. And so when I was a junior, not a junior, I was a junior, but when I was going to my senior year in college at Florida Atlantic University, we protested, and the professors and the staff listened, and so they finally offered African studies. And there was a class that I had, and I mentioned art because there was an art history course I had, and in the book there was, as I mentioned before, European history and art, Asian art, Spanish art, et cetera, et cetera. So I asked the professor, and she was a very lovely lady, probably one of the most nicest teachers I ever had, really. And I asked her in front of the class, and I wasn't trying to make a scene. I asked her, why is it that this book has no African art in it? Like, there's plenty of African art. I've been to museums, I've seen art, but this book literally skips over any African art. They might mention these books might mention Egyptian or Kemeton, which is the original name of Egypt, but there was no African art, no type of black art at all. And she said, and this what really got me going. She said that unfortunately, this is the book that we've selected, and there is no African history in this art in this book, or what any art history of Africa in this book. And then I told her, well, then we need to get another book then. And all the students agreed, like, yeah, I mean, why isn't there any African history or any type of art in this particular book? The same thing goes with any other book. So once we were done with the protest, the school finally offered African studies and some other courses. I took history of the Caribbean, which was a great course. Taught me a lot about the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, particularly in Haiti and Jamaica. But it really featured Haiti. There's a lot more information about Haiti within this book. A woman wrote a book called The Brief History of the Caribbean. And her name is Jan Jaworski or something like that, if I'm not pronouncing it right. But The History of the Caribbean. I still have the book to this day. It's actually falling apart. I probably read it 10 times. Literally falling apart. And in the history class, the African studies course, the professor, Dr. Becubetz, she asked me a question, when they finally had this course. And it was like, so many people wanted this course. And most of us was black, maybe 99% black. And she had us do this project. And she asked each and every one of us to select a country. Now, she knew I was Haitian because I had a tattoo of Haiti. My first tattoo, I have like 3 tattoos. My first tattoo I received when I was a sophomore in high school says Haiti on my arm. So she's seen this tattoo, and so she knew I was Haitian. And she asked me which country do I want to do when it came around to my turn. And I told her I want to do, I just picked Kenya because I kept, I know a little bit about Kenya. And she said, no, you're not going to do Kenya. I'm like, why is that? You let everybody else choose what they want. Why can't I do Kenya? She said, because I don't think you know your history. And she told me, I want you to do a project on a country called Benin, which small country in West Africa, next to Togo. And I said, okay. So just so happens, long story short, that this country was a warrior kingdom, and majority of Haitians are from this particular country in West Africa. They had about 11 dynasties, and General Toussaint Louverture is the great grandson of one of the kings from this country. And I literally dove into the history and culture of not just Haiti, but before Haiti was even formed in West Africa. And this country actually was very formidable. They controlled and ruled West Africa for a very long time. And well, not all of West Africa, but there was the war, and there was very much in power in the West before colonialism. And so when I did this project, I had to study. I had to go. My mom helped me, before she passed away. Rest in peace. There was a diary that I ran into for this project. In the diary, I found it at the library in Fort Lauderdale, the African History Research Library. So shout out anybody who's listening from that library in Fort Lauderdale. Very helpful staff. So there was a diary by General Leclerc, who was the brother-in-law of Napoleon Bonaparte. And in his diary, he spoke of how, and I had my mom read it and translate it for me. It was in French. It spoke about how General Toussaint and the leaders of the Haitian Revolution, just the warriors and the women and men, were so brave and courageous that they never seen nothing like it in their lives. And to me, it made sense because they came from a warrior kingdom. You know, many of the Africans who were enslaved in Santo Domingo, they were actually, what they call it, Saint Dominique. They were actually, born in Dahomey, that warrior tribe, and which is, for those who are not familiar with the name Dahomey or
Yeah,
Bini.
just one thing, Kevin. We do have
Yes.
five more questions in just an hour. Just try to get to the final thing with how the king name, with how
Okay.
how you
Well,
adapted it.
with
Yeah.
this all tied. I got you. I got you. Thanks for
Okay.
giving me a
Yeah.
heads
Yeah.
up.
That's
This
fine. Yeah.
ties. This is a very important that I explain
Okay.
this.
Cool. Okay. Cool.
So
Hmm.
when
Okay.
when when I um when I realized that the Amazons, I almost lost track of what I was saying, but hey, thank God I'm back. The Amazon women, Amazon queen. Have you heard of Amazon warriors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have. Yeah.
It's the it's the only all female warrior tribe known in history, and this was from this particular country. So when I did this presentation and looked at artifacts, all the art, and et cetera, they're also very good in bronze and copper art. When I did this presentation, there was a huge sense of pride. It's like I was awakened, and from then on, I no longer wanted just to be known as Kevin. I asked for people to call me King Kevin because in that country, Oba means king, and I kept hearing the word Oba, 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 OBA. And ever since then, I just asked my friends and family to call me King Kevin, and it just stuck with me. So there you have it.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story, and it shows how passionate you are about history and, and all of the different things, that people don't know about Haiti. I mean, I didn't know that. What was the name of the country that you talked about in Africa?
The
Benin?
homie Benin, right?
Dahomey?
Today's called Benin.
Benin. Yeah. Oh, so it was called Dahomey back then. Okay. Then I learned two more things. Um, so yeah, I had no idea that that was where the Haitians were descended from, and that they had power when residing in that country, and then also throughout West Africa, right?
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So that leads me into the next question, because again, this is about talking about things that we don't know. So we, as in the general population. So that brings us back to the topic today, which is how the Haitian Revolution impacted the fight to end slavery in the U.S., which is largely an untold and not really talked about thing in U.S. history. Not even a lot of African Americans know about the Haitians' role in the fight to end slavery in the U.S. So, so in 1804, after Haiti declared itself as an independent nation, the U.S. government did not recognize Haiti's independence until 1864. Why was that? Can you tell us more about this portion of history? Because I think people would be interested to know.
You know what? And I was hoping you were going to ask me that question. I was like, please ask me that question. Yes, there's a very good reason. Now, and when Haiti received their independence, America and France and the world powers, Britain, they refused to recognize Haiti's independence because the slave trade was in full force. So they didn't want to recognize Haiti's independence because that means they have to recognize the freedom of the enslaved Africans that they owned at that time. So Abraham Lincoln, who actually was the president to acknowledge Haiti, it's not like they didn't know Haiti existed. Shoot, George Jefferson, that's George Jefferson is the guy from the Jeffersons comedy show. I was just watching that, so scratch that. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, the first and third presidents of the United States. Not that I forgot John Adams, but the first and third president of the United States were actually heavily invested in making sure Haiti did not win that war, which we all know that they won, and which is another reason why Haiti is paying for that victory to this day, because Haiti turned, they changed the balance, the power balance, because for years the powers that be, they always talked and treated Africans who were, enslaved Africans as beneath them, as nothing, subservient, that they want to be treated as slaves. They want to be whipped. They want to be raped. They want to be abused. They want to be destroyed. They want to be maimed. Like all these egregious behaviors that, our people had to suffer. But what Haiti did, and there's a great book by CLR James called The Black Jacobins. Have you heard of that book?
No, I haven't heard of it.
It's a monumental book. As a matter of fact, every book that's written on Toussaint and the Haitian Revolution, they have to. I can't, not necessarily they have to, but every book that I've read, they always refer back to this book. As a matter of fact, I heard of this book maybe 15 years before I actually purchased it, and I was like, wow. So in that book, he also explains that America, France, Britain, and other powers, superpowers at that time, they couldn't afford to accept or acknowledge that freedom. As a matter of fact, they put an embargo on Haiti, so they couldn't trade. But Toussaint, being the man that he is, was very clever. Toussaint was the leader of the Haitian Revolution. He didn't do it by himself, but John Adams, who's the second president, and here's something that maybe most people have never heard of. John Adams, who's the second president of the United States, was actually doing business with Toussaint.
Hmm.
Where in the world would you ever hear of an enslaved people doing business with presidents around the world? Toussaint made that happen. That's how powerful he was. Now, Abraham Lincoln acknowledged Toussaint and the Haitian Revolution because they needed to win the war. They needed to win the Civil War. The Union needed to beat the Confederates, and they needed black soldiers. And for a very long time, abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, which I'm going to get into, I'm sure you're probably going to mention something that I'm going to talk about him, and other abolitionists, they were always mentioning how great and how powerful, white or black, they could have been a white or black abolitionist. They were always speaking of how glorious and how powerful and how magnificent the Haitian Revolution was, and how it just literally changed, it changed history. The French Revolution, well, first there was the American Revolution, then you have the French Revolution. So this was like the age of revolutions. But they
Hmm.
ignore the biggest one of all, which was the Haitian Revolution, because it makes Africans look good. It was going to empower people, black people, enslaved people to fight, to throw off their shackles and fight. And that's something they did not want. As a matter of fact, if you were Haitian, if you were African from the island of Saint Dominique, and you were trying to get to the United States, they wouldn't let you. They would not allow any enslaved Africans. And I keep saying enslaved because I don't call my ancestors slaves. That's the wrong wrong title for them. They were enslaved. They were queens, they were kings, they were leaders, they were workers, builders, agriculturalists, et cetera, et cetera. They were not slaves. So by them being able to empower and inspire other slave revolts, you got Nat Turner revolt that happened in Virginia. You had the Denmark Vesey revolt. You have the one by Tuga. There's so many. The revolt in 1811 in Louisiana, which was possibly the biggest revolt in slave revolt in American history that we barely know anything about. So they didn't want people knowing about this history. They literally put an embargo on that history so that it wouldn't spread or it motivate the enslaved Africans to fight. So to answer your question, I hope I did.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely, yeah, because yeah, it's pretty sad how, we have this legacy of slavery in the country, and it's understandable that such a bold and really historic, event such as the Haitian Revolution, was able to happen, and they didn't want, people to know about that, obviously. And, just as an aside question, do you know if, because I know you were just talking about how, people from Haiti who wanted to come over to the US, were they ever, taken by US authorities and then, sold into slavery under false pretenses? Because that wouldn't surprise me looking at our country's history. Or were they just kept out and barred from coming?
They were barred from coming.
Mm-hmm.
Even the boats, you know what I'm saying? They would not allow they wouldn't allow sailors, they wouldn't allow enslaved Africans from Haiti to come into the US, which is going on right now. We just seen what happened last year at the border. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing new. That's part of American, you know what I'm saying, American history. Now, I want to mention one more thing. There was a guy named Wendell Phillips in 1861, right
Mm-hmm.
before the Civil War started. He's a white abolitionist, and he said something very, very interesting. He said that I know that I'm talking about Africans here, when referring to the Haitians in the island. I know we're talking about Africans here, but let's compare the leader to our leaders. Leaders being Napoleon Bonaparte, George Washington, and Cromwell. And he said that if you compare General Toussaint with any of these three men I just mentioned, Toussaint outshines them all. If you really take into consideration where he's from, as far as being enslaved and then becoming free and having little to nothing and still beating the world superpowers. That's how big of a magnitude the Haitian Revolution was. You know what I'm saying? This was a monumental event. As a matter of fact, it was so big that I mentioned C.L.R. James' book, The Black Jacobins, but he also wrote a stage play and produced a stage play after Toussaint, played by what's his name, Paul Robeson, who's also a black activist.
Mm-hmm.
There were books, plays by not just black people, because C.L.R. James is from Trinidad, but you have white people from Germany, Britain. I mean, he was well spoken of. And just to clarify something for you, um, we don't see too much about Haiti or General Toussaint or Jean-Jacques Dessalines or Henry Christophe in the history books. Now we don't. But during Jim Crow days, this the Haitian Revolution and the leaders of the Haitian Revolution was heavily spoken of when schools were segregated, when it was all black schools, up
Mm-hmm.
until Brownfield's Board of Education, when they what was that, 1964, when
Yeah,
they
50 in the 50s, yeah.
50 in 1954.
1954, yeah.
Right. It
1954,
wasn't
yeah.
until then when schools they got integrated that they, put a shutdown on that history. You know what I'm saying? But Marcus Garvey, General Toussaint, and the rest of them, they were always promoted. As a matter of fact, thanks to John Bracey, who's a professor at University of Massachusetts, he stated that when he was growing up in D.C. during Jim Crow days, that students used to fight, the black students, African Americans. They used to fight to play General Toussaint in the school plays in elementary, middle school, and high school. They used to fight. If you couldn't be Toussaint, then you'll fight to become Jean-Jacques Dessalines. If you couldn't become Jean-Jacques Dessalines, then you fight to be King Henry Christophe, his name
Mm-hmm.
was actually Henry Christophe became king. But I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely interesting. And as a theater person myself, I know how like, people can get competitive over things. And yeah, and then that's great that there's a sense of, empowerment from, from history in Haiti that, would translate into, an action like that. And so just to go back, I guess, to that 60-year time span, 1804 to 1864. So despite the US government not recognizing Haiti's independence officially, so were you saying earlier, just to clarify, because I
Mhm.
may I may have gotten a little bit lost, is that are you saying that the abolitionists, in that 60-year period, did everything they could to make sure that people knew about the revolution? And I mean, and obviously you also talked about how there were, slave revolts in the U.S. After the revolution. So can you talk a little bit about the abolitionist efforts to get it out and how I guess that among, just word of mouth helped to motivate, action around, ending slavery, as well as, getting into the slaves' years themselves, who were then able to, do a revolt, do
Oh,
revolt.
oh, definitely, great question.
Hmm.
One of the most well-known abolitionists that we know is a fellow named Frederick Douglass.
Hmm.
He's an orator, abolitionist, author. I mean, me personally, like I love his writing. If anybody has never read any of Frederick Douglass his books, you need to do yourself a favor, pick up one of his books and read it. Like he writes so eloquently. Now, in 1893, before I get
Oh,
to
well, that's a
1893,
little bit before, because what I meant was that, yeah,
before that,
because I'm
that's
wanting
right,
to
right.
see how, even though the U.S. tried to hide it, how it
Mhm.
got out anyway, if it did,
Oh,
because it
good question.
seemed, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, yes, yes, yes. All right. Thanks for checking me on the time frame. Um, to answer that question, news always traveled.
Hmm.
The enslaved, our ancestors always spoke with each other. As you all know, many people were sold and divided. From birth, from their mother, from their father, from their family. So there was no family structure, but news always spread. So if I was on one plantation, they say in Virginia, I come to Georgia, and I'm hearing about this revolution. And when I was in Virginia, I passed it on to Georgia. And if someone and everyone knows about it. Now they will whisper this news, and when they were around the slave masters, but when they were together in congregation, they praised and they celebrated these victories. You know what I'm saying? So news
Hmm.
was always traveling, always traveling. So it never really stopped. And there were newspapers that were still, put in the newspapers. However, if you got caught with one of these newspapers, or you were the company who published this, then you would face criminal charges or be put in jail, et cetera, et cetera. So
Hmm.
people always knew about it. It was always spreading. A lot of people get it misconstrued that just because people didn't have smartphones or the internet, that news wasn't traveling. There was a time period when people used to use ravens and birds to send messages. So news was getting around, and especially during the docks at the slave ports. People would hear rumors. A lot of people felt that this was a rumor. Like how is it possible that a nation of enslaved Africans would revolt and defeat the French, Britain, and Spain, which was impressive by beating any one of the three, but the Haitians beat all three. This was too big of a news, and it was almost impossible to fathom something like this. This was the white man's, at the time, nightmare. So they did
Hmm.
anything they could to suppress this news, but it was spreading anyway.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really good. And since the Civil War started in 1861, and then continued until 1865, do you know what spurred Lincoln into recognizing Haiti's independence in 1864, the year before the war ended? Was there any
Um,
political reason for that, or was there were
yeah,
they did Haiti help the U.S. in any way against the South? Militarily. It's curious to me that it led, right at the end of the war they do it, and then the next year the war ends. That's among a string of factors, but that the
mhm.
timing interests me. So.
Oh, definitely, definitely. The the Civil War, the Union was going to lose the Civil War. They needed soldiers, and the young man that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Wendell Phillips, in 1861, him and quite a few others were promoting that, look, we need black soldiers fighting. These people are very capable. But of course, that brainwashing that Europeans did, Africans can't do this, they can't fight, they're lazy, even though we built America and built the Caribbean, you know what I'm saying, and built most of the Europe. They It was something that they had to get away from because they needed more men. The Confederates, the South was fighting profusely. They never wanted people to be free, the Africans to be free. So, being that they needed some soldiers, and they were able men, strong, powerful, fast, educated as well, There was a book that I read in college. Actually, when I was out of college, I can't remember the name of the book on top of my head right now. But there's a book filled with letters, Buffalo Soldiers, the letters that they wrote. Now, when I read this book, I was so impressed by the way they wrote. So when I was reading, I was like, "There's no way that these guys were uneducated. Like you don't use these type of words on a cotton field." And just so
Mhm.
happened that, and I'm gonna remember the name before the show is over. These guys had to be educated. They were smart, and the reason why they wanted to fight was because they wanted to show America that they could hold their own. They wanted to impress, even though they want to get some of them weren't getting paid. Most of them didn't get paid. You know what I'm saying? Because the racist tendencies of the army, even though it was the Union, and Abraham Lincoln said himself, he didn't care. He didn't care if the Africans stayed on the plantation field. He didn't want to lose the country. You know what I'm saying? And they were going to lose
Mhm.
the country because the country was divided over slavery, the
Yeah.
North and the South. Not that the North didn't have slavery, they did, but the country was too divided. And if they didn't win the war, he knew that America probably wouldn't even exist. You know what I'm saying? So he had no choice.
But so the efforts of the of Haitian soldiers who helped out the Union ended up, putting, making Lincoln, make a concession and recognize Haiti's independence.
Yes, I wouldn't say Haitian soldiers specifically. This was black soldiers. These were soldiers that were already on the plantation fields here in America.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Now. However, I could drop a tidbit about the Battle of Savannah in 1779, where there was about six to 700 Haitian soldiers, free soldiers, that helped fight for America's independence.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And as a fact, I've spoken at the Battle of Savannah. There's a monument, huge, beautiful monument. Shout out to the African American Historical Society, not Haitian American Historical Society. They were able to raise the funds to put this monument together, which was about $600,000. It's beautiful, and it's right there in Times Square, not Times Square, but the downtown area. They call it the square. Right there, it's gated. It's about six soldiers holding guns, and one of the soldiers statues that's there was a little boy, a drummer boy, who became King Henry Christoph years later.
Yeah, 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 that's definitely really interesting. And it definitely shines a light on how Haiti's history and the US's history is intertwined. And that leads me into the next question is how would you personally define the history between Haiti and the US? The relationship and the history. I mean, probably mostly the relationship, but both really.
Haiti is enslaved today until this day. Haiti is suffering due to America. As a matter of fact, right now, over 52% of Haiti's resources goes to the United States. 14 to 15% goes to Canada, and I don't remember the percentage that goes to France. The relationship between the U.S. and Haiti right now, and you can read this. There's an article on New York Times about this. It's a slave relationship, master and slave. Now we in year 2022. Haiti right now is fighting to get decent wages because they're only paying them about 65 cents an hour, 9 hours a day. This is definitely a slave relationship. In 1915, there was something called the occupation of Haiti. From 1915 to about 1934, the U.S. took it upon themselves to rob, steal, and kill over 5,000 Haitian people during that time span. Not only did they impose their power on Haiti, General Toussaint wrote the second constitution in the Western Hemisphere after George Washington. And in that constitution, he declared Everyone is born free, man and woman. America wrote that in the Constitution, but they didn't mean it. It was just rhetoric to make it sound good, make people believe in this American dream. But Toussaint meant it in every word. Now, moving forward, 1915 occupation, when the U.S. came to invade Haiti with their Marines, they changed the Constitution. Jean-Jacques Dessalines in 1803, I want to say, when he wrote the Constitution, where he amended the Constitution of Haiti, he put in there that no white man can own land in Haiti. No foreigners can own land in Haiti. The U.S. came about 56 years later. They came, changed the Constitution, making it possible for foreigners to own land in Haiti. As we speak right now, there are mining companies rather, that own thousands of acres of land in Haiti because Haiti has billions of dollars of natural resources. Billions of dollars. In 2010, right after the earthquake, they all of a sudden find oil, gold, copper,
Sorry, you cut out a little bit
what else?
there.
I'm sorry. I was saying that
But
in
keep going.
right after the okay, so you heard me?
Keep
Okay.
going. Yeah, it might
That they
just
found
be sometimes it could be a tech issue on my side, but keep going.
no worries. That they find all this oil and gold in Haiti right after the earthquake. Now President Chavez of Venezuela, before he died, he stated that that earthquake wasn't a natural earthquake. He stated that this earthquake was man-made by the U.S. Marines searching for those billions of dollars of oil and gold using this software called HAARP, HAARP. And I'm going to go into the details of that. We can talk about it some other time because I'm actually doing a show tomorrow
Hmm.
live on Zoom about this subject and on
Yeah.
Haiti. Now, this has never changed. They enslaved Haiti, stole millions of dollars of gold bars, actual gold bars from Haiti, millions of dollars, sent it to the bank in New York Bank, New York City Bank, for safekeepings because the Haitians don't know what to do with it. That's what they told themselves. And so to this day, Haiti still suffers from the relationship that they have with America because it's a slave relationship. It's not something that benefits Haiti whatsoever. Because ever since the 1915 to this day, 2022, Haiti still suffers from this so-called relationship that needs to be severed. Some relationships you just need to dump and break up from. This is one of them. Haiti does not need America. America, France, Canada, they all need Haiti. In order for the tricks of the Europeans to work, and this is Black History Month, so this is something that I want everyone to listen loud and clear. In order for the Europeans' games to work, which you can see clearly in the Congo, different parts of Africa, and clearly in Haiti, the country has to be made to look poor. When they know the country is rich, Haiti is filthy rich, but it's poorly governed because of the puppets that the U.S. places in power who's going to play the U.S. games. If you don't play the games of the U.S., you get assassinated. You get killed or removed. You see what happened with Jean Patrol Aristide? He got removed out of office twice. We just last July in 2021, Jovenel Moise was killed and assassinated. This is a reoccurring thing that's happening in Haiti, and so hopefully we can change this. Because if we don't change it now, it will never change. Because the people of Haiti are losing hope.
Yeah, I mean, one thing though, just to because I obviously know that Haiti and the U.S., the U.S. has not, been a good ally to Haiti. They've definitely been exploitative. But I mean, just to play devil's advocate, though, I mean, you've had people like Papa Doc and Baby Doc, and you've had, I mean, you were just talking about how the U.S., is in support of these gangs, but at the same time, I mean, we saw, I mean, right now, the current Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, is, a suspect in the assassination attempt of the previous president. And right now, there is all these gangs that are, just kind of crippling the country. I mean, can you say that that is the U.S.'s fault that Haiti doesn't have, stability when when you've had dictators in the past, as well as, I mean, a lot of turmoil and a lot of things that have led to, I mean, the fact that you have the person who's the prime minister now being
Hmm.
suspected of having a hand in the death of, the president. I mean, can you really say that the U.S. is, the only thing that is behind all of that?
Yes, yes, I can. Now, and thanks for asking that question. The reason why I made that statement, and I've been saying this for years, is because when you look at it, look at the Clinton's Foundation. What have they been doing? What have been doing with the funds and finances that was given to them for Haiti? How many houses have been built since the 2010 earthquake? How many presidents has U.S. backed to be the leaders of Haiti? And you mentioned Papa Doc, and I'm glad you did that because Papa Doc was a very interesting individual for two reasons. One, my grandfather, he was actually the top security for Papa Doc up to a certain amount of time. And for some reason, I never got a chance to ask him this, but he withdrew from being the security chief for Papa Doc because Papa Doc was an extremely cruel person. But who put him in power? It wasn't until Papa Doc made threats to the U.S. that, hey, if you guys don't support me to be the president, I'm going to talk to Russia to help me be the president, and we'll form a relationship. If the U.S., as I mentioned earlier, the 1915 occupation, if they had the power to go into the Haitian treasury, steal their gold, and take it to New York, change the Constitution so that U.S. companies could come in, French companies, and God knows whoever could come in and set up mining contracts, set up, the UN. That's a whole another subject with the UN. But it's the U.S. who controls almost every single aspect of Haiti. Now, America is what I like to call the fire the fire starters. They create the fire, and then they call themselves to come to extinguish it as a fireman. They create the fires, and then they claim that they're coming to extinguish it. They've had a part to play in everything. Bill Clinton, when President John Bachar Steve was president, who got him out of office? It was Bill Clinton. So it never really. I'm not surprised by what I'm saying, what's going on in Haiti because it's been going on for a very long time. Just different presidents, same story, just different leaders. They've never had Haiti's best interests. And as a matter of fact, as I mentioned very early, very beginning of the show, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both invested nearly $500,000 at that time to make sure that Napoleon Bonaparte won the war, and he didn't win. Also, I want to mention to you the Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana Purchase was about what 13, 14 states. You know what I'm saying. When Napoleon lost that war, he lost interest in Western affairs. So if Toussaint and the Haitian warrior kings and queens, Suzanne Belair is a woman that was in the war. His wife Suzanne Toussaint. I just want to mention the queens as well. I just can't keep talking about the men because there is no real revolution without the women. Let's just be real. They got to be the men and women together.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't win that war, Napoleon would have invaded America. You know what I'm saying? So, by the fact that France went broke fighting the Haitians during this revolution, losing that war, in order to get France or for Napoleon to still maintain some kind of power at the time, he called himself Emperor Napoleon. He crowned himself, by the way. The U.S. would never have, it wouldn't be as big as it is right now. We might be all speaking French, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, that makes, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I definitely know what you're talking about with the whole, how do you define history between Haiti and the US, and also how Haiti's history impacted, Black history in the US. But let's get back to what you mentioned earlier about Haitian history not being well known in the US. How do you think we can solve that problem? Obviously, conversations like this are a part of that, but how else do you think that we could solve that problem? You're talking about how in the era of Jim Crow in Black schools, people learned, about the history of Haiti. How can we, or how can the Haitian community, along with people who are supporting its efforts here, how can we, encourage Haitian history to be part of, these textbooks, to be part of the curriculum in schools, state by state, possibly even, I know that there's, the Department of Education also has federal, standards for states to comply with. How do we, change Haitian history being shut out of, schools? How do we change that?
Great question. Now, as of recently, there's been this conversation about critical race theory. I'm sure you heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so some states are, blocking, history regarding the slave trade or just, slavery, period. Texas, Alabama. I can't believe they doing that in not Alabama, Mississippi, being that how many people were lynched, black people were lynched in that state. But anyway, this is what we can do. One, I'm a true believer and advocate of training and teaching your own children in your home. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
don't allow all the power of education to be, on the school system to your child, because you really don't know what they're teaching your child unless you are heavily involved in reading the syllabus and your children reporting to you every day. Hey, this is what I learned. So pick up some books. I've written blogs. My website kevindorival.com. I've written countless of blogs. I've done tons of videos on my YouTube channel explaining the importance of reading and education. So instead of waiting on the system to educate our children, we should be doing it ourselves. And if you can't do it because you may not have time, you understand parents are working very hard. I'm a hardworking parent myself. My daughter, she's already reading. Well, not really reading. She's 6 months years old, but she kind of like I'm talking to her about Shaka Zulu. I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
to her about General Tucson, about multiple people. You know what I'm saying? Like African leaders, Queen Azinga. So even though she's 6 months old, she's hearing these names. She's having this, you know what I'm saying? And she's going to continue hearing it. And she's going to read the books. Now, are we going to lobby for the schools to include, Haitian history in the books? It should. Because, and I'm glad, thank God. Thank God I did not forget to say this. If there's a Black History program, and I'm not saying every single program, every single lecture has to be about General Tucson or the Haitian Revolution, but if there's any Black History book or Black History program, if it does not mention the Haitian Revolution or General Toussaint Louverture, King Kevin Dorival, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and I mean it. If they do not include the Haitian Revolution or General Toussaint Louverture or Jean Dessalines or King Henry Christophe, any of these individuals, then that program is flawed, because the Haitian Revolution is by far one of the greatest achievements, if not the greatest achievement, of Black people in the modern world. As a matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
it is one of the greatest achievements in world history. How could it not be spoken of? I don't care about Black History Month. To be honest, I don't celebrate Black History Month. Black history is too powerful to be contained in one month. But I do understand its purpose. So if there's any program that does not discuss this magnificent victory of Black people, then I don't have any interest in it. Not because I'm Haitian. And I should always think, oh yeah, I have this bias, I'm Haitian, so I gotta promote, the Haitian leaders and this and that. But until I read this book by Marcus Garvey, Life and Lessons of Marcus Garvey, on page 3, the very beginning of his book, For those who don't know who Marcus Garvey is, he was a leader of the UNIA, which is Universal Negro Improvement Association.
So we only have 10 minutes left. So let's maybe just quickly. I'm sorry to
That's
interrupt, but
cool.
just to wrap this one up, and then we'll go to the next
All
one.
right, no problem. Marcus Garvey wrote in page
Okay.
3 that out of all the leaders in the world, he outshined Napoleon, Cromwell, and any George Washington, any other European leader that's heavily promoted in their books, in the school books. But Toussaint Louverture was the greatest of all of them. He deserved the highest praise out of all of them. When I read that, and he's from Jamaica, but he understood black economics, black unity. That's what he was about. He praised
Mm-hmm.
and worshiped, damn near worshiped Toussaint in the Haitian Revolution. Frederick Douglass, same thing. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman. They all praised the the victory of the Haitians because before segregation and Willie Lynch and Jim Crow and all of that, they all understood what level the Haitians were on. This was something that was unforeseen, almost impossible. It was a miracle that they won. So the Black History Program in every black home, and also other homes as well, they all need to have something regarding the Haitian Revolution. Go ahead.
And so, how do you think that? And this segues into the next question. How do you think that can be used, or how can that be used to further, the fight for equality, for black rights and everything in the US? Because I think because the next question was, why is it important for Americans to be aware of the history between the United States and Haiti? But I think that we've answered part of it by, saying, we have to have, we have to know about it. That's the first thing. But then after that, how do you think that people can use it today, as as a motivator, as ways to inspire people, ways to educate people who don't know about it, to kind of join up with it? How do you see that being? You see those methods being effective?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And just to make sure that I hear you correctly, you said that what is effective? The learning about Haiti being effective
Yeah, I mean, well,
as a
more like
motivator.
the strategies. Yeah, like learning about it, linking it, and then even kind of like reminding people, when you're talking about fighting for, vote rights for Black people, you
Okay, I
police
got you. I got
reform,
you.
all that stuff. You know, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh,
So
well,
you think
definitely.
that would
I
be
understand.
using the history of Haiti?
So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, to answer your question. In my second book, The Winner in the Mirror, Activating Your Superpowers, Mind, Body, and Spirit, I talk about the Haitian Revolution. Also, my first book, The Courage to Believe, I talk about the Haitian Revolution. And the reason why I mentioned it was because how much it inspired me. You know what I'm saying? Because as a man and as a black man, as a leader in my community, this was a mission impossible that the Haitians were able to win those battles for those 12 years fighting. We all face missions that are impossible in our lives, that seem impossible. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way that we ever can see that we would be victorious is if we have faith. General Toussaint, and I didn't get to mention this, his name, Louverture, he changed his name from Toussaint Breda, which is the plantation that the owner's name. He changed it from Toussaint Francis Breda to Toussaint Louverture. Louverture means the opening, the one that finds the way. Now, those of you who follow the Bible, there's an individual named Moses, and Moses did the impossible in the Bible. Not saying that I believe the story because honestly, I leave my thoughts to that. He opened the Red Sea. He found a way to allow the Hebrews to go through the water and to find their freedom. Toussaint was a real life Moses, whether you believe in the Bible or not. So that story alone, no matter what color creed you are, but especially if you're black, it does matter. but no matter what color or creed you are, male or female, for a man to believe in himself and to change his self value, to believe in himself and to have a success image of himself, that in itself is something that we all should learn from, take heed to, because it was impossible for them to win. You talking about an army of enslaved Africans who have nothing but pitchforks, knives, and horses. Eventually, they got some guns, but to fight well-trained armies who spend millions of dollars on artillery and ships and swords, and for these untrained at the time anyway in the beginning, but Toussaint ended up training them, and
Mm-hmm.
because he fought for Britain and Spain, that's a whole nother story. But for him to be able to do such a thing, that should motivate anybody.
Yeah, it
That
definitely
by
speaks.
itself should be a reason why it should be in the history books and why we should learn from it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely speaks to the whole, going against impossible odds, the David and Goliath, another story in the Bible.
Correct.
Yeah, definitely, with us, being able to, feel inspired to go up against something that, might seem hopeless, which is something I definitely feel in my own life with certain things, being able to kind of tackle them, and kind of using that as a reminder. I think that's really good. So
Thank you.
Kevin, it was wonderful talking to you today. Thank you so much for all of your, thoughts. Definitely really inspiring and interesting. I hope the listeners also enjoyed it. But can you remind the listeners where we can follow you on social media? What books have you wrote and where to get them, and then also how we can contact you.
Oh, definitely. My website is, I have two websites, actually three websites. But my main website is kevindorival.com. That's my first and last name.com. Kevin, D as in David, Orival.com. All my books and projects and blogs that I mentioned are on there. Please don't get my books on Amazon. I know it's a little cheaper on Amazon, but they get 70%. I only get 30, so I get 100% from our website. I just make sure I say that. But my first book is called The Courage to Believe. Never give up. Keep moving forward. It's a inspirational autobiography, and the first chapter in that book is called The Royal Bloodline, which I talk about, my family history in Haiti and also about the Haitian Revolution and et cetera, et cetera. My second book is called Seven Types of Queens, King's Desire. It's a relationship goals book that compares. It's a compare and contrast of ancient queens with women of today. It's my bestseller. It took me to London. It took me to Haiti. Throughout the U.S. on book tours. So it's still my most popular book. My third book, which I hope is getting me on Oprah. So anybody on the show knows Oprah. I would love to get on her show. It's called The Winner in the Mirror: Activating Your Superpowers, Mind, Body, and Spirit. This book is to help people who may lack confidence or trying to find their inner powers. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of us, we give our powers away to people and materialistic things when God has blessed us with an abundance of inner beauty and wealth. So this book just helps you tap into your natural powers and to know who you are. And yeah, so my YouTube channel, please subscribe, KevinDorver.com. When you go to my website, you definitely see that. And I'm honestly hoping to raise about $20 million. I haven't started a fundraiser as of yet, but I will be making it known to raise $20 million through touring and speaking and community events to write and produce a film on General Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. I believe it deserves that light. Danny Glover was working on the film since 1999, but from what I'm hearing, he's no longer pursuing making this film. His grandmother is Haitian, believe it or not. So I want to continue on that. Wesley Snipes, Angela Bassett, Don Cheadle, and a few other actors and actresses. Oprah Winfrey supported this film as well, with Danny Glover. But I want to take on that task with some like minds and put it together. Before I die, that is my goal, other than being the
Hmm.
best father in the world.
Okay, well, that's really good. Great, and and good luck with that and everything. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you today, and thank you so much for being our first guest.
Oh
We
man, I
hope
appreciate
to
it. I feel
lots
honored.
of faces. Yeah, so I'll drop a link to your website on Twitter right now. Let me just do that. questions. And yeah, and also to everybody who's listening, please follow us on Twitter, and also, you can follow us on our other platforms by clicking on the Linktree link in our Twitter bio. Thank you again so much, Kevin, for your contributions today, and we wish you well, and I hope you have a good day.
Man, I appreciate it. Thanks to the THELAR management group. Man, you guys are awesome.
Hmm. Yes, thank you so much, and thank you so much to our audience. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll stay tuned. All right, bye bye.